That's okay.
Brushless and brushed motors?
Everything's on camera.
I don't care about
Or you are large, but it's all the way over there.
Correct. And one thing I might add there is.
Hi, I'm Aditya.
I'm Kyle, and we're going to show you what we did as far as strategy is concerned. So we came up with some terms and kind of broke the game down into some sections to help us kind of reason through and decide on strategy. So we're going to walk you through that. So that's kind of what you're seeing here. This is a simplified view of the field. We've split the relevant parts from shooting's perspective of the field into different zones, and we've labeled those zones with numbers. So Zone 1 is your starting sector. Zone 2 is the area of the field behind the shield generator and behind the trench. Zone 3 is in front of both of those things, and Zone 4 is your opponent's sector. Note we do not assign a meaningful zone to the shield generator itself, because you're going to have a heck of a time shooting from there, so it was not really within our purview. Now let's break down these kind of different categories we have here. So there's 4 main components of strategy this year. There is your shooting / passing / dumping, or the way that you're actually using the power cells themselves. There's what you're doing with the control panel, and whether you can rotate and position it into a specific place. The end game, whether you climb, park, do nothing, or some ambitious people may even decide to try to lift others, but that was outside of our analysis. And with the trench, you need to decide whether you're going to go under it, which is option A, under it, which is option A, and over it, which is option B.
One thing I'm going to sort of break down right now is sort of cycle times and sort of the way we came up with those, using our prior sort of first knowledge and sort of some guesstimation. We came up with some sort of estimates for how long robots would take to go down some of those pathways, and then use those to be able to determine how long robots would, move across certain strategies, whether it's shoot 2, shoot 3A, which we will explain a little bit further. If you're really interested, you can go into our full analysis, which will be edited and broken down into the exact derivation of a lot of these.
In precise terms, what is dump 4A with control panel? So what that means is that what we're talking about is a robot that is low to the ground. It is below 2 foot 4 inches and capable of going underneath the trench, having taken balls from the intake, and then delivering those to the 1-point goal of the other side of the field. And then in addition, completing the control panel activities by rotating the control panel wheel, and ideally, if possible, climbing. That outlines our strategy and kind of the order of operations. And so it goes in that, it follows in that order. Dumping, manipulating the control panel, and then climbing.
Correct. And one thing I might add there is that we chose to sort of avoid shooting due to the complexities that involve a shooting sort of design based on sort of some sort of initial feedback from sort of our build team delegates to sort of see what would sort of work best for both us and given our short time span, and also what would work best for a broader first community who might be interested in sort of adopting a similar strategy.
As far as the end game, our priority is to climb, and obviously to do so in a balanced way. That's fully what we'd like to do, and we expect that will be what a lot of teams will be trying to do. It is very valuable.
And one other important point to note here is that we were considering sort of, this is all just analysis for one team. It's sort of our view, and correct me if I'm wrong, at least my view, and Kyle jump in here, that a combination of these teams is really what's required on a winning alliance in sort of playoff match play.
That's right, and being a team that really helps with the stages and the capacity and the control panel, I think means that you're a real aid to whatever team you're placed on, and you're going to help them get stuff done. Whereas it's very possible that as a shooting robot, you're not going to be able to help maybe make the difference between on a team that's less skilled, an alliance that's less skilled.
One thing I will add there is that sort of a dumping robot would get you a much significantly further along towards that ranking point during general match play than sort of most of their strategies, and was also part of our initial reasoning to be able to go down that direction.
Yep.
So those sort of it's our view that those sorts of bots may end up being the one ones that are picking, sort of in the early weeks.
That's
While
right. If you can make the difference on your team and you can make your matches, half of your matches, 4 ranking point matches or 3 ranking point matches instead of 1 less, that'll add up a lot.
Yeah.
And we expect teams will be very successful who manage to pursue those ranking points.
And one other thing that's very common in strategy is playing to your team's advantages. And here we're sacrificing shooting, very exciting part of the game to focus on things that would really add value to the team.
That's right.
In both in terms of the control panel, a niche part of the game, and also the end game, which
is incredibly valuable.
Which
If
are
you look
both
at the bonus
incredibly
assessment, you have to do quite a lot of shooting to justify not completing both of those other objectives.
So what we want to do here real quick is now run through some of these different different strategies. You see, as we've already explained, sort of the breakdown of the field, 2A, 3A, 3B, 4A, 4B.
So if you remember from before, we numbered the zones of the field that are shootable from 1 to 4 from back to front. So Zone 1 is your own sector, and so it's not a place you can shoot from. That's why we start at Zone 2 here. Zone 3 is the part on your side, outside of your sector, but before you encounter the trench and the shield generator. Zone 3 is after both of those devices, but before your opponent's sector, and your opponent's sector is Zone 4. Now, the A and B scripts represent whether or not you're going underneath the trench. So A represents going under the trench, whereas B represents going around it.
Yep. And one thing, and then in addition to the pathways, there's the combination or the permutation across, the permutation across each of the different, shooting options, which is either shooting or dumping. And shooting, which we defined as, flywheel style shooting of some kind, or some way of getting the ball into the high goal. And dumping is sort of focused on the low goal. We didn't really consider any sort of mixed strategies there. We were sort of focusing on one or the other.
That's right. This assessment of cycle time is pure. You can combine the cycle time analysis and the point analysis of multiple strategies together to create hybrid analyses. That is not something that we did.
Cool. You want to explain capacity value here, I think.
Yeah, so if you've been reading the rules, you might have noticed this kind of term called capacity that's been popping up. And capacity is really important for how you move between the different stages. Now, to activate stage 1, and that really means to complete it, you have to actually get 9 capacity, which is to say 9 balls from your team into your goal of any kind and in any of the different heights or locations. If you get 9 of those right and autonomous ends, and it always does, then you will enter stage 2. Now, to complete stage 2, you need another 20 of those capacity, and you also need to do a control panel activity. Once you've done both of those, you can do another 20 balls and another control panel activity.
Right.
And so overall, you can't overflow capacity. If you have not completed the challenge of a stage, any excess capacity is lost. But the idea here is that capacity weights the fact that a ball scored in the 1-point goal is worth just as good as a ball in the 3-point goal when it comes to meeting those capacity requirements.
And one thing I will note there is, there is a little bit of a nuance to how those were calculated. Those were calculated not from those expected point values, those average point values that we were talking about, but rather the individual probabilities, because we were indeed looking for the actual ball counts, the balls that were actually making it.
So instead of, you look at the probability of you landing a 2-point shot, a 3-point shot, and a 1-point shot, you add all that together, you get the probability that you hit it at all.
Right.
You multiply that by 1, and you have yourself the expected value in capacity.
Right. And one other nuance that I do want to mention that we did consider was we did make sure that we noted the probability of missing shots, and we took
That's
that
right.
into account.
Probability of getting 0 points is kind of how we represented the idea of a miss, and so all the distinct outcomes here are covered.
Okay.
We'll talk control panel and endgame really briefly, and then we'll move on to our kind of final analysis. So what we did is, cycle time here is a misnomer. This is simply the time associated with those activities. But to rotate the control panel 3 revolutions, we did our best to estimate what that would entail based on reviewing the footage of the field tours, as well as inspecting our Lazy Susan that we have here. And we also imagined that positioning it, since that requires less revolutions, would typically be much faster.
Yep.
We've attached the point values on the right-hand side. We have climbing and parking assessed similarly. We looked at how long we expect that to take from a neutral position. And so altogether that gives us the ability to assess the value over time of doing different things. And that's crucial to our final analysis.
Yep, and one thing I will add, it should be obvious at this point, but all of these cycle times and times are evaluated in seconds.
That's right. So it's in points per second or balls per second in terms of capacity rate and point rate.
And so now what we're going to do is sort of move into our final analysis, which should be sort of determine and govern our final decision of
That's right.
of what we plan to do for the next 48 plus hours. And so Kyle, you want to introduce that?
Yeah, so what we did is we actually took all that information, we put all the different shooting strategies in a table. To the right we inspected kind of the different values of the different activities, and we noticed that capacity rate seemed like it was something that was going to be pretty hard to nail, and you'd need a pretty good alliance to get all of those objectives met.
Absolutely.
And so we, looking at that, we decided to kind of prioritize that cap rate column, and that's how we ended up with the strategy we chose, which was dump for A, which is to say going to your opponent's zone and by way of the trench and then dumping. And that has the greatest effect as far as accumulating balls quickly. It's very, very rapid.
One thing that I will sort of jump in here and note is that we did consider the other strategies, and you'll note like sort of the gradient coloring that sort of denotes how valuable they are in terms of points and in terms of cap rate. And while a team that might not be there are two factors when we sort of walked into this analysis. There's this whole quantitative analysis, but there's also a feasibility analysis, and we had a few members from sort of the build team to help evaluate that in sort of an abstract sense. And so given our time constraints, we're looking at trying to focus on not shooting, even though there might be a greater effect in terms of either point rate or cap rate. There's a trade-off.
Yeah, exactly. And we also assessed the fact that doing that, choosing to dump instead of to shoot, would let us interact with more of the game elements in more interesting ways. And we hope you'll appreciate the diversity that gives in our robot.
Yep. And so one last thing that we did end up doing is sort of calculate, the total cycles that might, a robot might end up being able to perform, given those, those initial parameters, both total cycles, ball scored, and point bonuses, which you can note on sort of the last three columns.
So we're gonna start walking through some of the analysis in page 1. So unfortunately, the spreadsheet we have here doesn't necessarily have all the information that we broke down from times. It has the finalized numbers. We have those numbers recorded, in images and other places. What I can do is actually walk you through on the whiteboard potentially how we kind of estimated this piecewise and what components we used to estimate this.
And maybe one thing you could also do there is sort of show what a cycle might look like for this robot.
And now I'm going to proceed to kind of walk through how you start to estimate some of these, aggregate cycle times and things. So if you want to estimate, for instance, let's jump straight towards the one of interest, the one we actually chose, going to zone 4 and dumping in the goal. That journey has a number of steps. The first step is to load all of your 5 balls. Then you need to traverse 2-4 specifically. Then you need to dump, and then you need to go home. So we estimated each of these parts individually and averaged the estimates that we managed to get from our panel. And that's what we used to create kind of the best effort aggregate estimations that we used. And we estimated different segments along the way and estimated both paths, both through and around the trench. And so by adding all of that information together and using, like I said, our estimations, we're able to come up with a number to assign to the time that it would take to do this. Because that's the time estimate, is the sum of all of these components. On the point value side of things, that required us to estimate how likely we thought each of these outcomes was going to be. Now for dump, that's very simple. We estimated that if once you've spent the time to line up correctly, you're not likely to miss any balls. So that's made that part of the analysis very simple. For that specific
the
strategy.
goal is pretty big, and so we're hoping that given the goal is pretty large, we're thinking that hopefully we're not going to miss anything there.
Exactly, and so dump is pretty reliable there, but we did assess the reliability of other strategies. That's part of what actually helps it out. Dump being very, very reliable, contributes to its cap rate, not just its speed.
And again, we are looking here at the average team. There might be, again, teams that are, much more, have lots of experience with shooters and can up that, probability estimate. And we might be able to
Exactly.
open source this, spreadsheet, and you guys would be able to play with those probabilities based on your team.
And so the main way to think of it is that expected value of time and the expected value for the points is a function of your own skill. And so that will vary for you, in pure terms.
And we're being, we're a newer R3D team, and so we want to be, pretty conservative with the way we're estimating.
Exactly, and I think these estimates will be meaningful to the average team because they're fairly conservative but realistic as well. They're not very pessimistic. That would be an inaccurate framing.
Absolutely. And one other thing that I think is important to note here is the no bag at this point, and so we expect this game to the meta of this game to evolve. I mean, obviously this isn't a complete
And the
picture.
robots to evolve.
And the robots absolutely to evolve, and so this strategy is sort of what we see as sort of an initial gameplay. But as robots evolve and gameplay evolves, who knows what we could see in week 4, week 5, or even week 3.
Exactly.
All right,
And that's it for the strategy session.
I really appreciate your time, and excited to see what your feedback is on this design. We're going to be posting this around, and excited to hear sort of your feedback on what you think of our analysis, and what your ideas are in conjunction to what we have.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you so much.